This is Phantom Electric Ghost, and we're live on the air on our Twitch, YouTube, and Facebook channels with Allison Hare for the first time. How are you doing tonight?
Yes, I'm so excited to be here. Yeah, good to see you.
We also like to mention that we're going to be on Newsly, that we're featured podcast on the Newsly platform. So please use coupon code GHOST, and you can get 1 month free premium subscription so you can stop scrolling and start listening. Our podcast will be on Newsly within an hour. So thank you again for being on the program.
It's an honor. Thank you so much.
So you have an interesting story. You were in the corporate tech, I guess, a sales person selling corporate technology or in technology sales. And then you've become an entrepreneur, podcaster, and blogger. And maybe you can document that, you know, what your podcast is and how that whole adventure. You talk about it being an adventure, and how that you know, hang on to your seats type of situation. So maybe we can start from maybe the beginning of that story.
Yeah, no problem. I appreciate it. Yeah, so I've been in technology sales for over 20 years. So, in the corporate world, Fortune 500 companies, and I think I burned all the way out. And last year, I decided to leave. And it's been an incredible leap of faith. I started my podcast 4 years ago, and I have a degree in broadcasting. And back then, I guess I made a decision. I preferred money over, what I loved. And I think now
Mm-hmm.
I'm figuring out a way to do both. And I left with no plan, and really, truly a leap of faith of just, what if I can make a go of this? So, my husband and I talked about it, and we kind of decided, um, let's figure it out. And so I'm kind of starting from scratch in a lot of ways, but have quite a fire. It's been an odyssey, to say the least.
Yeah, podcasting has been a big. It's been a big because if I found a way as a musician, I'm a musician, I'm a producer, and I started podcasting in 2016. I didn't even know what it was. Some other musician, well, a DJ, radio broadcaster said they wanted to interview me, and I didn't even know what a podcast was. I thought it was like a news show or something.
Yeah.
And so I was on this platform called Spearman, and I got interviewed, and then we ended up liking each other so much we did a podcast for like 6 months, and that's how I got into it because I got interviewed, and then we both started doing this combined show. It was like two hosts, and then I said, well, you know, I like doing that so much. Let's try to talk to musicians and do like a behind the music type of thing.
Yeah.
And I was doing that for many years up to 2020, and then I expanded it beyond just musicians into talking to people like yourself. You know, I've talked to like I don't know, all types of people, like, you know, thought leaders, CEOs, film directors, you know, people who are shamans, life coaches. It just
Yeah.
expanded to
These are my
a whole
people.
different
Yeah.
area. So it's a very open form, and I found, you know, I'm would expand. And I said, well, why can't the podcast be expansive too? So I said, well, I'll make them both the same way. And
Yeah.
it's
That's
been a
amazing.
journey, and it's been really cool. I've gotten a lot of lead generation, and people think, well, that's only for businesses. Well, musicians, we get leads on projects. So other producers contact me, and I get to work on things just from being in the podcast. So it's we can kind of talk about your journey, but it's just fantastic how podcasting has opened up.
I think what people don't understand about podcasts, especially when you're podcasting, is that you do have a position of authority in some ways, or at least some type of credibility. And you have the ability to meet some of the most amazing people you would have never connected with otherwise, other than this platform. So I'm a big fan. I relate to what you're saying.
So how did you feel that you're stuck? Question that you already answered is the first one that shows up is, what keeps women stuck, and you felt like you left where you were stuck. So maybe you can describe, like, how do you feel that how did you come to that conclusion that you were stuck, and how do you get out of it?
Yeah, I'll tell you, even just kind of on the other side and listening to my audience and what I've noticed. So, I have a podcast called Late Learner. It's been rebranded this year. It used to be called Culture Changers. And so I used to interview people I still do, people whose
Mhm.
work kind of breaks convention and changes how we live. But over the years, the show has really evolved. And the reason why it's evolved is because what we've learned, and especially with the pandemic, is that I tend to have a lot of listeners. They're primarily female, and a lot of them have checked all the boxes. They've done everything that they're supposed to do. They have comforts in life. They've got the house and the car, and maybe the spouse or partner or kids or whatever it is, and they get to a certain point. Like maybe they have a corner office, or they have kind of a nice cushy job, and they get there and they're like, why am I not fulfilled? Why am I not like, is this all there
Mm.
is? And it almost is like this scratching, like this gnawing of something is missing, but there's a guilt in feeling like, I have it good, or other people have it worse. So why do I feel like they almost feel shame for feeling like it's not enough. And so for me, I have always had one foot in the corporate world and one foot in a more creative space where I don't know, I never felt like corporate fit all the way, but I could play the game for a while. And as time went on, and the podcast, at least for me, has been so expansive and so it just feels life affirming, where it got to the point, I ended up, not to take too much of a tangent, but a few years ago I stumbled on a dance class. I've never really danced before, and I felt like lightning hit me. It was so fun. I'm not good at it. I'm still not good. I've even become a dance fitness instructor, but I loved it so much. And so when I was at work, it felt like undeniably, where before I could like fake it, but it felt undeniable, not fake it, like it was fine. Like I could do it, and it just was what it was. And like I was hoping I could do fun things on the side, and that would be enough. And at work it would feel very constrictive. It would feel like I was an imposter, and that I just didn't fit in. I didn't, I wasn't as hungry as other people were for like I just, I don't know, I didn't care as much about certain things. I cared about clients and doing a good job, and I would work as hard as I could, but it was like, it felt constrictive, it felt
Uh,
restrictive. And
yeah.
then, like, when I would go to dance class or be behind a mic on a podcast, everything would feel expansive. I felt like I was totally in the right spot. And so it almost felt like I could no longer deny, how bad it felt, even though I just, not that it felt, it just felt increasingly worse. Sorry, I'm banging all my
You're
I'm
not
banging
being
my
like
microphone
you're
everywhere.
uh,
I'm very passionate with my hands.
it's like,
But
being a musician. Yeah.
what's that?
I, I think what I found, what I find as a musician, like a lot of musicians, because it's hard to get paid. So a lot of us have day jobs, or we have our day job, right? And
Yeah.
then music is what we really want. And the thing what I found
Yeah.
was, I'm an IT guy, but I'm an electronic musician, so I found a way to have energy between synthesizers and IT. And then I got
Mhm.
into podcasting, and then what I rather do is just be an artist all the time. And my
Mhm.
daughter gets to, I still have to have one foot in the IT world, and then one foot in this like expansive world of music and podcast. On a balance where now, I'm doing like 50-50 between both of them. And eventually it's probably going to end up creeping all the way over to just doing art and podcasting. But
Mm.
I,
What a
I
dream.
I've kind of not the diet as a starving artist because I think I can't really starve.
Yeah.
So I couldn't take the risk to go fully into it because a lot of times in music, you're not guaranteed anything. So you have to find
Mhm.
opportunities where you can. But yeah, I feel like that creative self, yeah, I'd rather do music all day. I'd rather be
Mm.
playing shows all day. That's what I'd rather do. But
Mhm.
I found a way to be responsible and be creative, and this working that to me.
Yeah, I can see that. And I think even artists, like people in the dance community, people in the artist community, choreographer, musician, it's tough, even with education, like they're so powerful and impactful in the culture, but not paid remotely what they need to be. And it's sad, but at the same time, I feel like with all of the opportunities expanding, whether that is, I mean, look at us, we're broadcasting on StreamYard, YouTube, Twitch, all of the platforms that have the ability to expand the message, whatever that could be. And, it's an attention economy. And so I think there are ways to figure out how to do it. I just don't know that there's a magic
Mhm.
formula for it. And it is kind of like bumbling in the dark a little bit, but kind of chasing the light. And the light is, what lights you up, what turns you on.
Yeah, I think the whole thing with my experience again has been we, sometimes the numbers don't show you what opportunities you get. Like I started doing this and then I ended up interviewing two Grammy award winning producers. I
Mm,
didn't even know their agents. I was able they saw what I was doing. They said, "Hey Keith, we like what you're doing. We'll talk to you." And I'm like,
mhm,
"Wow!" And it was a big compliment. And I interviewed like over 150 artists. And I started getting a reputation that I do like a pretty honest interview, and I really ask artists about what they're doing with their work, not what they're doing
mhm,
with their life, and what's in the newspaper and what's in the gossip column. I want to get behind what they do in art. It was a place where
mhm,
people respected that, and the fact that I'm a musician that was able to kind of not a journalist but another musician interviewing another musician, and then I said, well, I can talk to other people. And it started expanding, and I get all kinds of opportunities I would have never thought. And it was no real business plan. I'm just going to do it because I like it. And
mhm.
it just has started to actually is earning money. And I'm like, wow, it wasn't something, as people say, well, you must have planned that. Sometimes the things are not planned.
Mhm.
And
Well,
people
it
get
sounds
surprised. They
like
say, well, you must have done that. So not really.
but it sounds like, you kind of follow the breadcrumbs for what lights you up, right? Like where your expertise is, where you shine. And so that is something that I'm exploring as well of just being open to opportunities and seeing what comes out of it. It almost is being in a consistent state of wonder of just, I wonder what could happen? Who could I meet? Who can I serve? Who can I, like what kind of conversations can be had? And just being open to the magic of what that can produce together. So that's really cool.
And I think it's the whole experience of being the starving artist kind of methodology. It's like, oh, I gotta suffer opportunities or you can't take money. And I think it's sometimes artists kind of cut themselves off where like if I get an endorsement deal, I'm not gonna do that because I'm an indie artist and I don't like that. Right. So I do something I believe in, push a product I don't believe in, but you get opportunities to kind of push, your goal. My goal was to interview people who are emerging, and then if I get people that support me financially, I can do that goal because I can pay my bills. I can actually serve the people I'm trying to serve. And so it
Yeah.
found a way to, not be tied to like a too tight a manifesto or some kind of concept where I can't make money because that's wrong. And musicians will fall into that where, to be legitimate, I have to be a starving musician and I have to do this and I
Yeah, it's a
can't
new
make
world
money.
now. Yeah.
So you can be an influencer and you don't have to be an influencer and you can get opportunities. So it's kind of micro influencing. And that's why I've kind of
Hmm.
found this niche like within the podcast world. There's just like all these micro level influencing opportunities that you would have never thought. And you have to just be kind of open to what comes your way. And you just, I never thought I would talk to a shaman. And then I ended up talking to a shaman. It's like I never thought I would talk to a film director, and then I got to talk to a film director. So I try to be as open as possible in terms of who I can actually connect with.
Hmm.
So your experience in life to make a decision about quitting your job, how did you factor like the money and the time and those things to be able to follow your, what was the process?
It was hard because I had actually decided it was time to leave thanks to a tarot card reading. And I waited until I had some stocks vest, so I waited a few months to do that. And my husband and I decided that we would have a limited time where we had, saved money over the years, to figure out, it's a challenge because my entire life, when I was a teenager, my mom was a stay-at-home mom and my father was, the breadwinner. And my mom used to beat it into my head and my sister's head, never rely on a man to make money, always make your own, And so I was driven, always been driven to work hard, to be a workaholic, to be productive. And my mother didn't make that choice, And so she was like urgently instilling in us. But it's funny because, when I left my job and the financial aspect has always been, the tough part, right? To figure out what that looks like. How much money do you need? And the more I chase after the money, the less it comes to me. And that is the hardest part. And so when I left, I decided that I was not going to make any decisions until I could hear my own voice. And, I know that sounds a little bit weird, but I was so driven by the productivity. So it's very hard. Like my value is wrapped around what can I earn? What can I produce? Super type A personality. And then, when I
Mhm.
left, all of that was gone, but I was still going, 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 and just felt almost shameful. Like, what am I going to do now? I felt guilty for like going out for a walk or going out for a hike in the middle of the day when I should be working. I should be doing something. So there was a lot of unlearning,
Yeah,
and it took
yeah,
me at
yeah.
least 3 months to, kind of figure out like, okay, now I can start to, consider some options here. And in that time, I did all kinds of crazy stuff just to go inward. Some of it was traditional, like just, regular therapy in nature, ecotherapy, those kind of things. I did 2 12-hour walks with no technology, like no cell phone, audio podcast, just walked out my door and came back 12
Mhm.
hours later. And I did psychedelic assisted therapy, worked with shamans as well, and just trying to figure out like where is my voice? What do I think? What am I going to do? What's going to be the right next step? So financially, I have not figured it out, but I think as again, like the moment I get worried about money and start pursuing because it happens, right? Like I'm like, okay, we've gotten to a point where I need to work. I need to bring in some income. And I'll start looking and there's so much wrapped up where it doesn't feel right. And that every time I go
Mhm.
look outside, I get wrapped up in knots like, oh my God, I'm walking back into what I left, and then I double down on my own thing, and then things happen. And so it almost is like that breadcrumb theory that you were talking about talking to producers and meeting shamans and, and being able to start making money. It always feels like I'm getting the least resistance when I double down on my own thing. And when I try
Yeah.
and go back, it feels completely not right anywhere, and very stressful, like so stressful where it almost makes you paralyzed. At least that is my experience. And so I'm kind of documenting this journey on my blog and through the podcast as well. And what I've learned is that a lot of my audience are burnt out professional women, a lot of times, that are, I can't tell you how many men and women reached out when I left my job and said, "Oh my God, I would love to do that. Good luck. I'm going to be watching." And they are, they're like, "What is
Yeah.
this girl going to do next?" And so it almost is like a test case. Can I do this? Will I be okay? And so I don't have the answer to that, but I can tell you what feels right and expansive and what doesn't. And that's been a cool experience too, to kind of see what doors open. And that I can't I think it's becoming exceedingly clear. There are times when I try and microwave something that needs more time to bake, and it just doesn't work that way.
Hmm.
It's like it just doesn't work. And so sometimes it just
Yeah.
needs more time to expand.
Well, what I found is like I'm a child of the '70s, and you know, my brother was 7 years older than me, but we were in the middle of the whole kind of go, and that time the hippies and that whole culture, the Woodstock generation, they felt
Yeah.
free of kind of the corporate controls restraints that now people are tied to, where they could go off and join the Peace Corps. They could go off
Mhm.
and just hitchhike around the country and go from festival to festival, or go just,
Yeah.
not try to make money wasn't the core point. And it seems like a lot of people got co-opted and kind of put into a structure. And I grew going into college, like, oh yeah, you gotta go into the corporate world. You gotta go into IT. You gotta go into something. You gotta be a lawyer. You
Sure.
gotta be a doctor. You gotta be something. That you couldn't just be somebody who's going, oh, I just want to walk around the US, hitchhike everywhere, go to Canada, go to Guatemala, go be in a Peace Corps. People are like, well, what kind of person does that? So I think that's where this whole new world of the net has given people the ability to go and seek their dreams, become a YouTuber, become an
Mhm.
influencer, become a podcaster, become a musician, become an actor, go create your own games, create your own things, your own TV shows. And people are able to, on this new world, if they dream it and they put the effort into it, you can actually be successful. And so that's
Mhm.
not something that people told us you could do. They said, oh, you there's no way you can do that. And now people can actually chase their dreams and be their own boss, control their own life. And I think that's I think the big change.
I agree. I think also, like, while I think there are conventional methods, I don't think there's anything wrong with those ways, of being in the corporate life at all. I think in mine, it almost feels like a thrilling roller coaster ride to figure out, but it feels like, you know, the places where it's the easiest, there's been a lot of resistance, I think, from me, of just deprogramming and unlearning all the belief systems of being productive, being worthy, earning money, what that entails, and kind of living in that very, you know, uh, conventional world. But I also think that some of the marriage between the spiritual side of things and marrying with the practical is kind of where there is a new space and maybe a new language for, where, like, I'm not all the way woo, and
Hmm.
certainly have a lot of skepticism for that. But I think there's been enough science and enough research and enough doctors and scientists and, people that are saying there's more to the story than only what you can see. And so opening up those possibilities and understanding of what could that mean for us as a world when it comes to value and earning money and all of those things, has been
Yeah, I think
promising.
yeah, yeah. Well, it's. I've been a dreamer and a musician. I'm a sound designer. I use synthesizers to build sounds from scratch, and it's like very experimental. And it's
Mm,
not really meant to make money. It's meant because I have a passion for doing experimental electronic music. And people, I found myself with that passion going. I ended up in here where I've taken it and it actually feeds back into my audience, right? So being on this show, I get people say, "Well, what's this host about?" And then and I get opportunities, and so it's all been like a full circle process. That that's something I never thought was ever going to really be like kicking it anywhere, but just something I'm passionate about has driven
mhm,
me into places I never thought I would go. So art can drive, and a lot of times people kind of push down art. They get programs, they don't want to fund it, they don't want to fund music, they don't want to fund people doing artistic things. And really, as an artist, we're like poets. We think about the muse, think about the universe. There's a lot of spirituality in the art world. A lot of like your
mm,
inspiration kind of comes from the fact that a musician that kind of, if you open your, you can channel things. And so it's a lot of things that are kind of very spiritual. I'm a Buddhist. And so there's a lot of things I feel like in terms of being a creative person, it comes from that part Cherokee. And I do feel spirit animals. I feel Gaia. I feel the earth. And so I put that in my creative process. And a lot of people who are into creative processes will kind of say that's where it comes from. And it's very healing. A lot of artists, we use our work as a catharsis. So I totally respect deciding to, kind of be your authentic self and go for what you really want to be.
mhm,
Because I think that's part of the whole thing. I've always felt that that's what the music does for me. That's how I got here.
hmm. That's an interesting background too.
Yeah, I think different types of beliefs can bring either work for you or not work for you, and there's like differences between like beliefs and values. And I was talking to like a psychotherapist that says a lot of people confuse their beliefs with values, and they caught up in structures that really maybe is not something that they really wanted to be part of because they didn't fully understand like the world they're in until they kind of hit this aha moment and say, "Oh, my belief isn't a value," or my value is not belief. It's like they have to figure out what are my true values, what do I really want to be in life, or what do I really care about. And sometimes it doesn't happen until you have that kind of moment of clarity.
I think what's interesting about that, I've done a lot of episodes on this, on like changing people's minds and, like kind of the groupthink kind of thing. And, like all the studies show that if you're going to change someone's mind, let's say you have somebody that has a different belief, you're trying to convince them that your position is right. Um, it's funny because it doesn't matter how many facts or data you present, it has everything to do with the group with where they belong. And so if that information is coming from a respected source that is part of the group, it's much easier. Otherwise, there is resistance. It's a very fascinating study when you think about belief systems, values, and then putting things into practice, and understanding where it all goes. It's kind of fascinating to see what's happening, whether it's in the US or the world or the divisiveness. But it has everything to do with the tribalism of the groups from,
Yeah.
the groups from where you belong. It's really interesting.
And the were like like revamping yourself because maybe you were caught up in a belief system that you thought was really your value, but it really is not.
Yeah.
It was like somebody else's point of view and they told the value. And so you came to the table thinking that it was a value and it was maybe a negative action. That
Yeah.
the real value is like, oh, respect, right? But then the way you were practicing it, you were using like aggression or violence to get respect, Well, that's not
Mm.
really respectful to another human being to be violent. And so it's
Mhm.
like the reprogramming that happens when
So
you start to have a
complicated.
calm
Yeah.
moment is, oh, that yeah, that's not actually a value. That was a belief that was like held kind of wrongly because it maybe, people just kept on doing it and they thought it was the right thing. And they kept on
Yeah.
handing it down and it's not actually the right thing. And so people, get put into structures. And I was a sociology major and I taught about, the microcosm and the macrocosm. So you have the individual and then you have the group. You have group think and you have individual think. And then people can get, manipulated by people who can understand group dynamics. And if they can get you to do what they want versus you want as the individual, you can suddenly be in a situation that doesn't seem to be in your control. It's actually kind of outside of your control because you didn't understand the situation you're in. Like you
Mhm.
could end up into a riot or a 1-6 or a revolution, and you find yourself caught up in this thing, and you look, oh, I didn't even know I was going to go there.
Yeah, it's so
But
complex. It's so
human beings
fascinating, but so complex.
have
Yeah.
you have a lot of complexity, and there's responsibility once you do something. But some people can end up in a place without even knowing how they got there. And sometimes
Mhm.
they get caught up and think to stop and look in the mirror and say, is this who you really want to be?
Mhm.
Right? Is this who you, and some people, I think when they really start to progress is when they actually start to question, like, where did I get this belief from? Why am I doing what I'm doing? Does it really make me
Mhm.
happy? And then that's when you really start to get the big changes when you actually ask yourself, what happens. And I went through my life, I had cancer when I was 27, a level 3
Mm.
sarcoma. I was
Damn.
painfully shy before the sarcoma. I did not want to travel. I did not want to do anything other than be kind of a nerdy kind of self, not really connected. After the camp, I camp years, I got married. I started, communicating. I just became a different person. People would say, "Well, post pre-cancer, you were like, you're not even the same person now." And what I realized is I had put ceilings on myself. And it was like this, really crucible moment of getting past the cancer and like a near death experience that triggered me to kind of, oh, look at what I was doing and
Mhm.
change what I was doing. Now, not everybody has to have that big a crucible, but at some point you do have to look at yourself.
Yeah, that's pretty powerful. Are you healthy now?
Yeah, I mean, I was 20. I'm 55. Been cancer free
Okay,
since
good.
27. But
Good.
yeah, it's just something that as a 27-year-old, I think it did hit me in a way that was very life changing in terms of
Yeah.
like my approach. And that's why I started getting the idea of expansion, the idea of looking at things that, got into Buddhism. I got into like, oh, I lived in Japan. I was willing to look at things, boundaries I had for myself. And I said, well, I don't need to have these boundaries. I need to go and expand as much as I can. And so I think it's just as a person that you try to get past your own glass ceilings. A lot of people, you
Mhm.
put your own barriers on top of yourself. You have to kind of look at it and say, did somebody actually stop you or are you stopping yourself?
Mhm. Hmm.
So I think that's like you talk about how curiosity can cure complacency. I think that is part of the dynamic. So maybe you can talk about how you approach that.
Yeah, I think what I've noticed is people tend to get in routines, they get in routines where they feel trapped or feel stuck. And that usually looks like an overscheduled schedule. And so, a lot of times people it's hard because they are so overscheduled. I know that I work with a lot of people and have a lot of friends that when you see them, they're bleary eyed. They're, like they're scheduled from the moment they wake up till the moment they go to sleep. And it's hard, like they think about, yeah, I would love to go to a workout or go do, something fun, but it's just so hard that it's hard to break out of the routine. And so I think, a lot of times the complacency is almost like, excuse me, the complacency is almost like, I feel stuck, so I'm just going to have to deal with this for now. And then that's it, right? Like
Mhm.
like I think the level of exhaustion tends to tick up, like there's an energy bank. And I know that when I was working in the corporate world, I was so burnt out that by Fridays, Fridays, I would pick up my kids at 5 o'clock. I'd get home, I'd put on pajamas and just be counting down the minutes until I could go hit that bed. I had no energy. I couldn't go out on Fridays, and even Saturdays, I just was so burnt. And I think a lot of people share that.
Mhm.
And
The
I think
burnout.
the
Yeah.
curiosity, like
Yeah.
the curiosity is asking yourself, what could be possible if? And so, I wonder if it is even just the new part of novelty of taking a new path, or just whether it's even taking a new direction, you know, to a familiar route. And so in January, I did a New Year challenge, and I did it mostly for myself, but open it up for other people. And I had this incredible group of people that every day their commitment is that they would do something new. So I put together like 31 different ideas. People would add to it. We had a closed Facebook group, and the thinking behind it was, if you're going to open new possibilities that were not available before, you have to make some type of new direction, or just open up new possibilities. And the only way to do that is really through curiosity of possibilities of what is possible. It's kind of like, I could go to lunch with this new person that I met. I'm really, really busy, but who knows? Maybe I could have a nice conversation with somebody, or take a new fitness class that I just never made time for, or even just maybe setting a boundary. It doesn't have to be just doing stuff, but it could be with
Mhm.
relationships that, maybe putting a stop to, or saying no to something that uh, doesn't fulfill you. And so I think that curiosity just opens new possibilities, and also tends to help with kind of reprogramming your brain. What do they call them? Neural pathways. And that the only way to do that is
Mhm.
when you are doing something new. And so I'll tell you a story if you're open to it. But many years ago, I did a Landmark Forum. It's kind of a controversial group, but it is like a self help group. It's been there for decades. And so when I was in my early 20s, I did this thing called the Landmark Forum, and it was very life changing. It was great. And they have these seminars that happen afterward. And I was probably in my late 20s. And I remember going to this seminar, and it was all about brain science. And there was this woman who was teaching it. And the woman was Belgian. She had this really beautiful French accent, Belgian accent. And the reason why I say that is because I remember how she talked. She talked about patterns, and she would say patterns, 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 but she would talk about patterns. And she said the brain, like most of the time, the brain is almost always on autopilot. And that means the routines. So if you find yourself in the same, like with the same boss, just a different job, or the same abusive relationship, because that's what you're familiar with from what you grew up in. And you keep finding yourself in these similar relationships with different people. It's your brain. It's just your brain is just repeating patterns that it knows. And that if it is, like in fight or flight, you're not really present there either. It's just going into autopilot and helping protect you in some way. And so the message from this was, the only time that you're present and truly present is when you are creating. And while I don't know if that is true, hopefully if you're a surgeon, you are present and not necessarily creating something while you're operating on somebody. But I thought of that
Yeah.
concept as being really groundbreaking of, the only time you're present is when you're creating. And that kind of planted a seed in me. And, at the time I had really no hobbies. And, I remember just, I don't know, 5, 6 years ago, I would be watching reality TV all the time. I had no hobbies. And my husband was like, "You need to get a hobby." And I was like, "I know, but I don't know what I'm good at." And it turns out, I have
Yeah.
some very clear identified skills. I just wasn't using them. And it just was fascinating that it just kind of burrowed in my brain of like, the only time you're present is when you're creating something new. And I don't know. I think it just kind of opened up something to seek out of what does that look like? What does it look like to do new things? So for me personally, I'm endlessly curious. Like the tagline for Late Learner podcasts is going from wonder to wisdom, but I'm always in a perpetual state of wonder. And, I find myself, uh, I don't know if manifestation, but I find myself just constantly in a state of like, wow, I can't believe that happened. It's probably the same thing for you, of talking to people you wouldn't have talk to otherwise, of just, wow, this is so cool. And so the more I have that state of wonder versus skepticism or just being closed minded. And I have a very healthy dose of skepticism. I'm also fighting as well, but choosing wonder and choosing curiosity make a huge impact when you're intentional, in my experience.
Being a producer and a musician, what's really cool is like you don't always know. At least the stuff I like to get into. I like to work with somebody I never worked with before. I like to work with somebody who's doing something totally different than what I do. And sometimes
Hmm.
there's a tendency today in the market to kind of clone things. So if something's successful, you just
Yeah,
keep on
think of all the
copying it.
Marvel movies.
And I'm
Yeah,
more
all
of
the
an
big
experimental
explosive
person.
movies.
Yes,
Reboot,
yeah. I
reboot,
like to
reboot.
do very experimental stuff where yeah, you just take something like fusion jazz and mix it with psychedelic
Mm,
rock and mix it with like blues. Or just or take like progressive rock like a band like Yes and mix it with a little hip hop. So the idea that you should just stay in a lane is totally against my mindset because I've been a very experimental musician and I've always looked people that did that like Bowie and people like Prince and people like bands like Yes and Genesis like that actually went all different directions. They even like the original Pink Floyd. It's very experimental
yeah,
that
and
actually became
Queen.
popular because they did something that people had that weren't doing. They were
Yeah,
taking these
like Queen
ideas
was
and making these
insanely
very expansive.
groundbreaking.
Yeah,
Even Dave
yeah, the
Matthews
same
Band,
idea. They
like
were
him
progressive
having
rock band.
Dave Matthews Band having, I forget what the instrument was, but it was
Oh,
just so
lots of
groundbreaking.
South African instruments from West
Yes.
Indian. Yeah,
Yes,
yeah, they
yes.
just the idea that he had a band full of people from all over the world,
Yeah.
and they had different skill sets, and they had instruments that were African instruments, and the idea that you could do that, Paul Simon did that with Graceland, and the idea that you can mix genres, that you don't have to be
Mhm.
stuck in a
Mm.
genre, and I was very
Mhm.
impressed with as a kid with the new wave movement because people say, "Oh, that's just synth," but new wave was a combination of like it was a lot of ska, punk, progressive rock, psychedelic rock, funk. It was all mixed up. And a lot of those new wave bands were like, it wasn't just synths, it was guitars and basses, and they had different approaches. And so
Now you're talking my
it was
language. You're getting close
hard
to my
to
favorite band,
um,
Rush.
Rush is awesome. And then I get the bands, like Talking Heads. Talking Heads was
Yeah.
hard to, to define, David Byrne. Because if you get to like that album, Speaking in Tongues, then you're like, wow, he was doing very experimental work they when they finally connected with an audience like wow that's very different and they were
Yeah.
coming out of CBGBs with the Ramones with Blondie and all those bands coming from that scene. The one thing I would point out to people today, the CBGB scene, they didn't all sound the same. You had Patti Smith,
Mhm.
you had Talking Heads, the Ramones, and Blondie. None of those bands sound the same, and they were all coming from the same scene. So that's why I try to point out to people is that just because you're in a scene, you don't have to all sound the same.
Yeah, it's so true. I could talk about music forever. I used to have a music blog many years ago. And I used to interview and promote emerging artists. So it's kind of fun. It's always fun to talk to musicians.
Well, I always try to point out that like musicians are kind of like life coaches. If you think about like the Beatles or Dylan or great music that actually inspired people to take actions. Dylan had
Mhm.
a lot of songs that were associated with civil rights movement. Like Bob Marley had a lot of songs that were like a spiritual concept of the Rastafarian. There's a concept with music at the same time. So there's all kinds of weird things that happen in music that can kind of put you in the life coaching or the shaman type of mindset. But George Harrison and all things was past and the type of work he was doing, very mind expansive, and not
Mhm.
just music. It's like also taking action. And when you look at the concert for Bangladesh, it's like so music can do something. It can actually have a bigger meaning. You can affect people. You can do like a live aid. You can help people. It doesn't have to just be about your ego. It can be about something that's more than you.
Mhm. Like Crosby, Stills, and Nash too.
Oh yeah, I love that. Or even like in Buffalo, anything that Neil Young was part of, he was tended to be in bands that would push things beyond just the song.
Yeah,
Um,
that's true.
and I've always been very interested in all creative processes because when you get into music, you work with video, you work with painters, you work with artists, you work with actors, so you get into the whole art world where there's a lot of different intersections between and the visual and the written and sound. And it's just really fun to be around people who have this creative drive to do something. And a lot of times it's like it's always something new. A lot of times it's
Mhm.
something that does make both sides work. And as a musician, if I'm a piano player and they could tell you, like being able to play with both hands triggers parts of your brain to do something. It puts me at peace when I'm playing. It actually
Mhm.
puts me into a state where I can't really think about my problems. If I'm
What a
playing my
gift.
piano, I just play my you play your piano. And I think that's something that people can learn however you want to get into it. But if you get into something creative like painting, even get into meditation and yoga, you try to get something that can get your mind off of the tracks that maybe make you do that repetitive behavior or lack of
Mm.
curiosity. You keep on doing the same thing.
Yeah, what a gift.
Try to give it to more people. Try to get people to realize that human beings are inherently creative and you can find all kinds of ways to do something, but sometimes we're being told that we're receivers and we should only like receive information instead of actually create it. And we're
Yeah.
all capable of creating our own unique stamp on how we see the world and
Mhm.
however you want to do it.
I think that is the work though, because like if you ask a bunch of 5-year-olds, "Can you draw? Can you sing?" They'll all raise their hands. But if you ask those same people when they're 25, "Can you draw? Can you write? Can you paint? Can you sing?" Maybe 1 or 2 would raise their hands, and, where does that go? And I think it's just the pressure to have it be perfect or be good enough, that people just put the paintbrush down.
Yeah.
They stop creating and tell themselves something that isn't true. So I think you're right. I used to, I've done a speech called Consume or Create, and figuring out how to consume less and create more. So I think there's some truth to that.
Well, a lot of people, like when I was with a lot of young musicians when I was like 16, 17, and a lot of people stopped being musicians because I can't be Jimmy Page. I can't be
Hmm.
Robert Plant. I can't match Hendrix, so I might as well give it up. And my whole point was like when the punk movement happened and bands like the Clash came, I said, see, you guys shouldn't have stopped because if you are an authentic self, you get bands like our replacements of what people found, or bands like nirvana. You don't have, right? But if you are authentic and you are honest, you can create art. I mean, look at Dylan. Dylan didn't have a perfect voice, but he had an amazing capability with lyrics. In a
Mhm.
world before Dylan, he couldn't make it because you had to have perfect voices like the Sinatra, the Nat King Cole. They wouldn't have even signed him. But the fact is, they got to a world that changed when he showed up, that they valued what he wrote and they
Mhm.
valued the song structure and what he was trying to say. And so you don't have to have perfect pitch. You don't have to be the best guitar player. But if what
I
you
don't know that
say
you
is
have to even be
honest
great.
and
Yeah,
true
I
and
don't know
has,
that you have to be great. I think if
yeah,
it's
you don't,
expansive for you, then keep
yeah,
doing
you
it,
don't.
if you can find joy.
I think if you're just honest, like, 'cause people, a lot of bands just honestly, well, that's not hard. The Ramones songs, those aren't hard to play, but the attitude of what they were doing was what made them fantastic. And so you can
Mhm.
have limited capability as a musician, but if you believe what you're doing, you can convey that to the audience. There's a lot of it is the kind of swagger that you can, and that's really a belief in yourself. And that applies to anything
Mhm.
you do. Like if you believe in yourself, you don't have to stop painting because you're not Picasso. You believe
Mhm.
that you have a right to do it. And some people like feel they don't have a right to do something if they're not Picasso. They can't
Yeah,
don't have a right
that's
to
true.
do it if they're not Bob Marley. And I think you ready to kind of open up your possibilities.
Well, here we are, Keith. We are preaching the creativity. We'll do it.
Well, I think it just helps you because I think if you're a creative person, you can find purpose in life and enjoyment in just finding that part of yourself. Whether you become get into dancing, you can start doing play, you start getting into acting, and maybe that was a dream. And when you're the young version of you, you say, "Well, I can't do that. People want me to go to college, they want me to be a doctor, they want me to be a lawyer," and you didn't do what you wanted. And then you find out like, "Oh, I want to do what I want to do. I'm gonna go do some off Broadway plays. I'm gonna go and do some painting, or I'm gonna go and be a wanderer and try to embrace nature and get into meditation practices and
Mhm.
maybe a course about how you solve your inner problems with your inner child." And it's like that still is creative. You're starting to become who you want to be.
Right.
So I think we're all in the same place, but the adventures that you have to come, like in your own terminology, I think people have to be willing to take those adventures.
Agreed. Agreed. Everyone needs to take adventures. Have more curiosity. I think it cures a lot.
It's definitely, I think it's something that they'll find, like, if they go to your website, what type of things do you offer? But you asked, I know that you're doing, you're blogging, but do you offer all your aspects of, like, what you're, working toward? Everybody can find it at Allison,
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah, so
Hair.com,
I
right?
do I'm just kind of doing a soft launch for Atlanta wellness retreats. I'm in Atlanta and kind of putting this stuff into practice. And also, this will be live this week that I'm going to be offering a consulting program for people that are looking to, like burned out professionals that are looking to
Mhm.
have more to be in more alignment and find more fulfillment. And so that is going to be launching this week. I also have the podcast Late Learner, and then my blog, which I publish every and send out an email every week on Thursdays. And it is more of a personal journal, but it has like an insane amount of people that open it week after week after week and send me notes about how it's helped them or that it's so relatable. So I'm very proud of that too. And so you can find everything on AllisonHare.com. And I appreciate the opportunity to be on here and have a interesting conversation with you.
Well, I think my audience is, I have a wide array of people who get interested in the people I present. And I always tell my audience, like, please click on that will be clickable when we're fully published. So if you Facebook, and you go to YouTube and you go to Twitch, you can click on that AllisonHare.com and it will bring you right there. Same thing will happen when we're on Spotify video podcast, which we'll be on later today, and on Apple Podcasts, along with like a bunch of other platforms that we're on. We will create a landing page for you that will have the Facebook, the YouTube, the Twitch, Spotify, Apple, and a blogger page we do on fameelectricghost.com. So
You
every
do it all.
podcast we do a blog, we do a landing page, and we send it to our guests so that they can push it, so people can go on the platform that they're happy with. Because everybody has different platforms, but we're on so many that whatever platform you like, you'll be able to watch or listen to this again.
I appreciate it, Keith. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, thank you very much. I do have to cut it short because I have another podcast.
No
Normally, I
worries.
don't do that, but we're getting a little more popular
No,
lately,
it's
so we're
good.
getting more opportunities. But I do appreciate the time that we had to talk today, and I do want people to explore this further by checking out your website. So thank you again for
Thank you.
being on
Thank
this
you so much, Keith. It was great to talk to you.
show.